It's the people who can make or break a leader. While cabinet is key to decision making, caucus is where MLAs and MPs debate policy, vent frustrations, and test the strength of their leader's agenda. A united caucus can push legislation, shape messaging, and keep a government steady. A restless one can derail the central message or even trigger leadership reviews.
For some time, it has been increasingly difficult to do our jobs because the Premier has stopped listening to our advice.
Welcome to Off Script with New West. I'm Shannon Greer, and joining me today to talk about how caucus works, why unity matters, and what happens when the cracks start to show is Monte Solberg, CEO of New West Public Affairs and the former Member of Parliament for Medicine Hat and a cabinet minister in Stephen Harper's government. Gord Olsen is also here with us today. He is a strategic advisor at New West and was the former senior staffer in the office of former Premier Ralph Klein. Thank you so much for both being here today.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to start with the role caucus plays because what a job looks like on paper is very rarely what it is in practice. Monte, as a former MP, we'll start with you. What is the role actually like?
Well, the role is very important. I served on both the opposition and government side, so I've seen it both types of caucuses and the impacts they have. On the opposition side, it's a chance for everyone to get together and really find out issues from across the country. Caucus members get up and raise issues with the leader. They provide, at least in the old Reform Party caucus and the Canadian Alliance, critics would get up and provide briefings of the legislation that the government was bringing in. On the government side, I saw caucus hold to account ministers and sometimes take them on. I saw some crazy things where, a caucus member stood up and tore into the leader for what seemed like 10 minutes, a big Westerner tying into the leader, eyes bulging, pointing his finger, yelling at the leader. And, it's the great human drama. The stakes are high, so there's a lot of pressure. And if you're going into an election, then the caucus gets really involved and, they want to make sure they have a say on strategy, tactics, messaging, and policy. So it's a deal. It's important. And caucuses can make or break a leader and a campaign.
And of course, it depends on how big the caucus is. Caucus management, a little easier with a smaller caucus. But when you have a lot of members, which is the goal, it gets more difficult. Gord, tell me a little bit about your experience, because of course you had a very large caucus under Ralph Klein.
Well, that's right. And it was always Premier Klein's objective to make the caucus feel that they were part of the team. And so it was his practice that any major decision of the government would go to caucus, would be thrashed through, hashed out by caucus members, and decisions then would come from the caucus. It served two purposes, really. It allowed all of the members of caucus to have their say and to feel that they had input into the decision of government. And so even if they were home and somebody said, gee, I disagree with that decision, he or she could say, well, I agree with you, and I said that in caucus, but the decision was otherwise, and I support our decision, and we're moving forward. The other advantage of bringing major decisions to caucus, the cabinet minister who is responsible would bring the matter to caucus, and there wasn't a single question that he or she would get from the media or from the public or in the legislature that hadn't already been put by the caucus. And so in that respect, it really seasoned your ministers as the matter moved forward and the decision was announced. And so it was a very good way to govern. It built team and it seasoned ministers as decisions went forward to the public.
Yeah, I just want to jump in on that, Shannon, if I can.
Of course.
Really agree with that. It was an opportunity to test ideas. And I'll tell you, caucus would push back hard. I remember in one case, a minister bringing legislation or a proposal for legislation to the caucus and getting absolutely dressed down in front of the prime minister. The prime minister said, well, minister, you got your feedback, better go back to the drawing board. And he did, in fact, bring back completely different legislation. So the role of caucus as a testing board or a sounding board and a testing ground is pretty critical.
Just on that point, essentially, they got a page one rewrite based on caucus. So, how important is it to engage members of caucus? I think sometimes we can get very focused on a premier or a prime minister or the cabinet, but really, caucus pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Well, yeah, like it is important. When I was a minister, I remember we used to bring in the members of the various committees that were associated with my ministry, first immigration, then human resources, and we'd bring them in regularly and talk about issues, and they'd provide feedback on legislation, on initiatives, on programs that were working and that weren't working. I mean, it was invaluable because the great thing is everyone has a stake in things working well. So they're really incented to bring things forward. They also, of course, they may have ambitions to be in cabinet. So, they want to be seen to be doing their job well. And it's a bit of an opportunity to audition to do exactly that. So it's important. The caucus is important. Pierre Trudeau famously said that MPs are nobodies 50 yards from Parliament Hill. Well, that's actually not true. That may have been true of him in his eyes, but really isn't the case in any caucus I've ever been part of.
And, my experience, Shannon, is there would be a full and thorough discussion of the initiative, and there would be people fairly strident on either end of the political spectrum, if you will. And it really helped the premier find the consensus between sort of what a right-wing member from a rural caucus might think and what an urban member from one of our major centers might think. He was very adept at reading the room and seeing where the consensus was and where his caucus would agree. And that was a direct result of having everybody come forward with their perspective. I can tell you these caucus meetings were long. They were excruciatingly long. But as you mentioned, the caucuses were large. Everybody was encouraged to say what they thought. Some didn't speak much. Others felt that they had to get in over and over again. That was a little frustrating. But as I say, it allowed the discussion allowed the premier to find the consensus within his caucus.
And certainly you've highlighted how it can work well and how I think it's designed to work. But we both know that those rooms can get heated. So, how do you listen to the caucus and try to find that consensus while still keeping the agenda on track? Gord, what do you think?
Well, to pick up on a point that Monte made, I was in a caucus meeting. There was a rather difficult issue. It went on and on and on. And as I mentioned, the premier usually could find the consensus. He finally said, this is enough. We're going to have a vote and just see where we are on this. And the whip kept track of the vote. It was very close. And the minister who was bringing the matter forward said, I'm taking this back to do some more work, Premier. When this number of our colleagues disagree with an initiative, it requires more work. And so, I get back to bringing it to the caucus for a decision helps really avoid the kind of heated division that can take place. Well, I can also tell you when matters don't go to caucus, things get off the rails. There was a piece of legislation that was brought forward by our justice minister to limit compensation to individuals that had been forcefully sterilized quite some years ago. And these matters were winding their way through the courts. There was a court decision that was quite significant in terms of the award. And the matter didn't go to caucus. And it was introduced by the justice minister. And their phones went off the hook. And their the premier and in particular the opposition were incensed. And this matter lasted 24 hours before the bill was pulled. That's an example of not taking the matter to caucus, having a proper airing, and hearing from the caucus who represents the province and the public of the province, and how things can go sideways by not having that proper process.
Yeah, well, I just, you ask about what do you do to sort of shepherd these things through and keep everyone together. It helps to have a great caucus chair. We had one in Deb Gray, and she would just get up there, command the room, keep everybody in line by, just she was just sharp at the mic, very articulate. She would say things to these very proud big men. She would say things like, yeah, we've heard that before. We've already heard that. You've said that already. And she would crack jokes, and she kept everybody just really in line. And, when you have that kind of great respect for the caucus chair, what a difference it makes. She was terrific.
Is there a difference between caucuses on a federal level versus a provincial level?
Well, I can't speak to it. I've never served in a provincial caucus, but I will say that, the one thing that's very different is obviously in a federal caucus, you are dealing with colleagues from across the country. And in our case, we also had senators in the room. So that added another dimension to all of this. So that would be very different. But, the geographical pulls and tugs, were difficult to manage. And I can think of issues, perhaps involving Quebec or Ontario, where, we in the West had a different point of view. And, it took a lot of negotiation and refining of legislation in order to get people to pull the same direction. The good news is that the other parties had the same kinds of challenges. So it all kind of balanced out, but it was a challenge for sure to deal with the regional differences.
And Gord, you've touched on this that you experienced it as well, kind of the urban versus rural caucus members. What are your thoughts at a provincial level?
Well, there was always differences of opinion, and I must say some of our colleagues from the city, why they were commenting on a policy to help cow-calf operators was beyond me. And conversely, you'd have rural guys that tended to stay out of it. The secret, though, was really to allow everyone to have a say, or to be welcome to have a say. Where some of the leaders, I believe, at our provincial level in Alberta came off the rails with their caucus was not allowing that opportunity, but instead providing talking points on decisions the government had made. Here's what you can tell your constituents in respect of why we're taking this decision. And that didn't work with the people that were ostensibly supporting the government.
Well, I would just add that, caucus was important for everybody involved to figure out how to message issues. It's certainly about policy and legislation and things like that, but inevitably a caucus meeting becomes about politics as well. And typically, if you're in the West and it's a farm bill, you want to hear from the agriculture critic and how they're messaging a particular piece of legislation and what it will mean to farmers and cow-calf operators or producers of various kinds. And that was invaluable because, in some cases there'd be talking points that came down from the Prime Minister's office or the Leader of the Opposition's office. That was great. But a lot of times, caucus members would have great ways of communicating what they were trying to say and how they would go back to their constituents. And we all learned from that. I mean, it was a terrific learning opportunity. I will say it was also a terrific place to make friends. I would say that's one of the great side benefits, and that would become invaluable, when it came to counting on someone to help you out in a debate or maybe come to your riding and speak, that kind of thing. So it was on the one hand, it had an official role, and on the other hand, it was as naturally happens. People formulate or get together in their groups and inevitably become friends.
I want to just jump off that about the mentorship opportunities. For example, you served in the same caucus as Pierre Poilievre, who started as a backbencher and now he's the leader of the party. What does the mentorship look like within caucus, and is that something that happens formally or informally?
Well, it happens both ways. There are times when you're asked to mentor, and I've done a little bit of that. I can tell you that in one case, somebody came to me when they were young and now are quite prominent, and were looking for advice. And my advice was make friends in caucus. You will rely on those your caucus colleagues at various times. You'll need their support. So start building that support. And it's safe to say he did exactly that. So I've offered that advice a few times to different people. In politics, you should always be in the business of making friends, in my opinion. I think it serves you well in 100 different ways.
As we kind of look towards a number of elections that are happening or have happened, Gord, how does caucus unity or division play into election readiness?
Well, I don't think there's any secret that the difficult decisions come to the fore in the first couple of years or the first part of the mandate. And when you get moving towards your election, you don't bring divisive matters forward. In fact, you're trying to be responsive to your caucus colleagues in terms of what are the priority issues, what are the capital projects, infrastructure, or what have you, that are significant to your region and to your constituency, and then government members, cabinet ministers, with some encouragement from the premier, work to make sure that we bring a package, a province-wide package forward that can be that becomes the provincial platform. So it's very important to have their input and then to respond to that input.
Yeah, I think, I'll just build on that. I think Gord's right. I mean, one thing you find out as you get closer to an election and the public's starting to pay attention to the issues, you figure out, that there's typically a difference between what's important to a government and what's important to people on the ground and the people you're talking to on doorsteps. In fact, I think you're seeing a little bit of that federally right now, where the prime minister is out there talking about nation building projects, but Pierre Poilievre seems to be really getting some traction on things like crime and affordability and immigration, which are, his messages, and he's been pounding away on them. But so I do think there's typically that gap, and caucus are the ones that alert the people in the prime minister's office or the leader's office or the premier's office as to what's going on the ground and what will resonate. And I think you'd be very wise as a leader of any political party to listen hard to what people are saying at the doorsteps. And, I can think of many examples, really going back to the last federal election, but not just there, where it was evident there was a big divide between, what the sort of the deep thinkers in a leader's office or in their strategy team wanted to push, and what MPs or MLAs were hearing on the ground.
I want to end with this because we have seen a few leaders lose their jobs, not at the hands of voters, but at the hands of caucus and or their members. So what's the one piece of advice you would give to create that caucus unity, build a loyal, engaged caucus? Gord, we'll start with you, and then Monte will go to you.
Well, I get back to my main theme. I mean, you have to listen to what your caucus are telling you, and you have to give them the opportunity to weigh in on critical issues and to be heard, to Monty's point, and to be heard on what they're hearing from their constituents and from their region of the province. If you don't, you do so at your peril. People start to plan or scheme, and that sense of team and unity is lost. And so you've got to be open, and you've got to make the time to sit through these long caucus meetings and hear what your caucus members are bringing to the fore.
Yeah, a couple of points. Brian Mulroney was famous for phoning the members of his caucus. So to the point where, and building goodwill and remembering birthdays, and if there was an illness in the family, he was on the phone. And it worked to the point where, they were at 18% in the polls or whatever they were at, and he still had caucus unity, which is really just remarkable. Stephen Harper, although he was not known for, being Mr. Warm, was very good at that as well. And Jim Flaherty, a great finance minister, used to meet with every single member of caucus to talk to them about issues in their riding before he put together his budget. I mean, he was terrific. So, it takes time. It takes patience, the ability to sit through a dinner or a coffee with somebody who may be going on and on and on. But that's the price you pay if you want to be successful in politics.
That is valuable advice. Well, thank you so much both for pulling back the curtain on what actually happens in caucus. And thank you so much to those who are listening to Off Script with New West. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you with our next episode.
Thanks for listening to Off Script with New West. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.